right. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you all today. A little nervous, but mostly excited. Before coming up, I was talking with Sheila and Carter made a reference to my mom, and I just felt like I needed to take a moment to honor her. She passed away almost 5 years ago. She was a business leader. She ran Virginia Women's Center for like 40 years, and she was on the board of Needles Eye, and she would have loved this. And I feel her spirit in this, and I know that she spoke at events, and speaking made her way more nervous than it makes me. But I just feel like this is a moment of carrying on her legacy and kind of passing the baton. So I'm just going to start with that. I also have the privilege of going last, and it's been so interesting hearing the other speakers. We have not coordinated or collaborated really on what we've shared, and yet I'm seeing themes and truths reiterated. And I think that is profound and exciting, and I'm thinking to what I'm going to be sharing with you all today as well, and it's going to continue some of these truths and themes, and I think that just means God has real word for us today. And I hope that whatever I share reinforces the word that he is speaking to you. All right, so I'm going to share my story with you all, and I'm going to start back in 2005, about 4 months after my college graduation, and I was still unemployed. And one fall day, similar to today, I found myself on my knees in the middle of my bedroom floor, just weeping, crying out to God, pleading for a job. I told God, I'll do whatever you want. I'll go wherever you want, just tell me and I'll do it. Just please open a door, give me some sort of hint. You see, I've never been that person that's felt a clear call from God towards what I should do with my life. I always assumed I would be in some kind of business. Both my parents were in business. My brother was following in the footsteps of going into business. And so when I applied to college, I just remember putting business administration in the field for major. I didn't really know what that meant. And at orientation, when I was supposed to be choosing classes, I just felt so lost. Was business administration right? Maybe I should choose education and become a teacher. I had not yet realized that I have zero patience and would make a horrible teacher. And my mom and I walked down to the admissions office and just sat with the portfolio of majors in our lap, flipping through, trying to get a sense for something that felt right. And then we saw it, international business. I could study Spanish, which I had grown to really love. My mom even said I could study abroad. And the program had a marketing track, which seemed like that might be a good fit. And so there it was, a spark of excitement, a feeling that this might be the right fit. And the next 4 years were great. They were academically rigorous. I got to study abroad in Spain, which was awesome. And I found that marketing came really easy. And so once again, as graduation approached, though, I felt this sense that I had no idea what I wanted to do. I enjoyed marketing, so maybe I could do something along those lines. I could possibly even teach Spanish, again, not realizing that I'd be a terrible teacher. But I felt like I was back in that admissions office, flipping through programs and career ideas, and nothing was standing out. So I moved back home, figuring my home network would be more helpful than a new city. And by the fall, when I was still unemployed, I was feeling beleaguered. I had been temping at an advertising agency, and I knew that wasn't for me. And my parents were super patient, but as the months ticked by, they kind of started being like, okay, it's time that you found something. And so there I was, on the floor, pleading with God to just show me something. Then through a series of networking steps, I came across SIR. I should probably tell you what SIR is. We've been around since the 1960s, historically a market research firm. And I would say over the past 12 years, we've morphed more into a strategic consultancy using research and strategy to inform direction, helping organizations understand where are they today, where do they want to be, and how do they get there. And at the time, it was when they were more strictly a market research firm. But I came across SIR, I went on their website, they were not advertising any open positions. All of the people on the site had master's degrees and PhDs, and I was like, surely they're not gonna be interested in me. But I had taken marketing research classes, I had taken statistics classes, so I figured, well, I might as well try. And so I did, and it worked. I was excited, I didn't know what to expect, but it felt right. So on almost 17 years ago, December 2nd, 2005, I started my career at SIR. So the thing about my story is that for the majority of my life, I've never felt, again, any sort of super clear direction or path. And what I really wanted and almost even expected was a burning bush moment. But God had other plans. My story is one of subtlety, of God's steadfast faithfulness and quiet direction, slowly peeling back and revealing his plan. And at times, this makes me feel inadequate or uncompelling, like, what authority do I have to stand up here? What do I have to say? I don't have some flashy story, but I'm reminded that the burning bush moments are rare, and that while many of us don't necessarily experience that direct, loud call from God, he does call us each into his work of renewing all things. And it's a beautiful thing, even in the mundane, day-to-day tasks that so many of us do in our jobs. And over the course of my career, God has revealed to me the importance of work, of vocation. And it's this understanding that has shaped and guided and influenced me into the person that I am today. And it has shaped and guided how I approach and use the influence I have and the skills I've been gifted. In Genesis 2:15, God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And Lori referenced this as well. Since the beginning of creation, even before the fall, God created us in his image to work and keep his creation. Another word for this is stewardship, and I just love that word. We're stewards made to tend God's garden, making order out of disorder. And as I started to learn and understand this truth, it created incredible freedom. I was removed from the burden of feeling I had to have a job that had a quote-unquote real purpose, or to be in ministry because that was the only true work of God. And it inspired a spirit of joy. I was able to find joy in the work, recognizing that as I created order out of disorder, even in a spreadsheet, I was participating in the work that God has called us towards, of reconciliation, of restoration, and redemption. I've always been a pretty disciplined person, and with this knowledge, it further formed that discipline. It instilled an incredibly strong work ethic, and I became driven, wanting to excel in my work, knowing that I was where God had placed me, doing the work of creating order out of disorder. And this became my MO, work really hard wherever I am. And this also did lend itself to my personality. My boss early on described me as a perfectionist, and I'm not. I'm an achiever. We're going to keep referencing that and the Enneagram. I am also a 3, but I didn't learn about that nuance until the Enneagram. Perfectionists are 1, achievers are 3s, and we fear failing. So in that desire to achieve, it created a sense of restlessness at times, a feeling that I should be doing more and having more impact. I twice applied for grad school in international development. God closed those doors both times. I sought out, and I also was approached by different job opportunities and career opportunities, but God just made it clear over and over again that I wasn't supposed to leave SIR. And at times I even wanted to leave Richmond, and he kept pulling me back in, deepening my roots and influence in the city, and I didn't understand why. In 2008, I participated in the second class of RCLI. Who here has been part of the Richmond Christian Leadership Initiative? Woo woo! Yeah, so I was in the second class. I felt incredibly out of my depth. I was 24, which is the youngest age they allowed into the program. And I quickly realized how little I knew about the city that I grew up in, how little I understood about the issues and nuances that create the inequities, and I felt really overwhelmed. I wasn't quite sure why I was doing the program and felt maybe I should have waited until I was further in my career, had more experience, and more to offer the conversation. And then in 2012, I led a very large project for SIR called RVA. It was a study that was commissioned by various stakeholders in the community to understand how can Richmond better attract and retain young professionals. And the study gained massive attention, and all of a sudden, people throughout the business community in Richmond knew my name. And I was invited to tables to share insights and bring new perspective. And that same year, my boss at the last minute couldn't participate in the Chamber of Commerce's Commerce's inner city visit to Denver. This is a trip that the Chamber takes every year. They bring 150 business leaders, government leaders, public officials, nonprofit leaders to go explore and learn from another city. And he couldn't go, so he sent me in his stead. And I felt like my world just opened up. It was an incredible experience, and I began meeting all these amazing business leaders and community leaders, and so many of them already knew who I was. And it was humbling and also a little bit exhilarating. And I remember in one of the large sessions, the group was discussing transportation and the challenges that the Richmond region faces. And I remember thinking, whoa, wait, I understand what they're talking about. And the reason I understand it is because of RCLI, that program that I went through 4 years ago. I had no idea why I was doing it. And as I thought on that experience, I realized that my story is one of slow play. God slowly preparing and positioning me. And I imagine that that's the way that God works with most people. You know, there are a lot of incredible stories of profound experiences in God's intervention, and I've had some of those, but for so many of us, I believe the story is the work of God in small ways, each day that forms us for whatever is to come. And one day down the road, we peer back and we see the thread of God's faithfulness. In many ways, that study and that trip were the launching point for me. I continue to grow in my skills. SIR is a fairly small firm, we're about 20 people. And as I started to feel unchallenged or like I wasn't growing, a new opportunity at SIR would present itself. Sometimes it was offered to me, and other times I had to go after it, chasing it through dedication and hard work and being my own advocate. And I quickly found myself in leadership roles. And about 6 years ago, I had an opportunity to build out my own vertical of work, leaning into the work of economic development and working with cities and tourism. And I was able to start developing strategies to, quote unquote, improve tomorrow, which is our tagline. But really, I felt like I could help make a difference in communities. And it grew in me a love for city and communities that had never really been on my radar. And at the same time, volunteer opportunities began presenting themselves, opportunities to serve on various boards. And I began to look around and realize that I had a seat at the table. And on more than one occasion, I was the only woman, or I was the youngest person, sometimes both. And I often felt very inadequate. And the feelings of imposter syndrome frequently reared its ugly head. And so I would just sit quietly, afraid I would say something wrong or something super obvious, and I'd get kicked out and thrown to the curb. And so the anxiety began to grow, and it continued to grow, and it still grows even today, even this morning. And I had to learn that in those anxious moments, I needed to pause and to remind myself of God's truth. I would remind myself that God would not lead me somewhere and then leave me. I'm going to say that one more time. God would not lead me somewhere and then leave me. In these moments, I would root back to the truth that we are made in God's image and we are his stewards. In Romans 12, Paul describes how we each have gifts that differ according to the grace given us. The gifts and skills each of us has are not of our own making. They are truly gifts from God. And as an achiever, I don't always like this notion. I want to do it on my own strength, and my own power, so that I can get the glory and that I can get the accolades. But God's truth reveals that all that we are and all that we have is of and from God. We are merely his stewards, working for his renewal of all things. And on top of this good news, I'll use the moment of pause to reflect back on God's steadfast faithfulness. I see his faithfulness knitted all throughout. He's opened doors, opportunities, grown in me new skills, harnessed others. And so these truths begin to relax my anxieties. They remind me that it's not about me. It's not about what I can or cannot do. I must simply be a steward of the gifts he's given me and not squander the work and opportunities in front of me. One of my favorite books is On the Road with St. Augustine, A Real-World Spirituality for Restless Hearts by James K.A. Smith. And if any of you attended the Common Good RVA conference in 2020, we had the privilege of hearing from him. But in his book, he says, resting in the love of God doesn't squelch ambition. It fuels it with a different fire. I don't have to strive to get God to love me. Rather, because God loves me unconditionally, I'm free to take risks and launch out into the deep. I'm released to aspire to use my gifts in gratitude, caught up in God's mission for the sake of the world. When you've been found, you're free to fail. Yeah, it's so good. These words bore into my soul each time, like in this moment. I mean, it's so true, and it gives us so much freedom. You know, I did not plan out my career. I'm involved in work and sitting at tables I never would have thought about. I didn't even know a firm like SIR existed doing the work that we get to do when I was in college. I merely worked really hard, and God has placed me, and he didn't leave me. He was and is and will be always faithful. And this perspective, this understanding, it flips how we think about influence and gifting. It becomes less and less about me or us, and more about God. It keeps us grounded, and it breeds humility and creates amazing freedom. The past several years have gotten even more exciting. God has been pulling back even more layers of his plan. And while my work is pretty varied, one type of effort we've led on many occasions is citywide or community-wide visioning. And in these projects, we bring together a wide array of stakeholders to create a broad and inclusive vision for their community. And I started to look around, and no matter what community I was in any part of the country, I realized that the church is not a part of this conversation. And it had me wondering why. Shouldn't the church be at the center of creating community vision? And as I unpacked that question, seeing the divisiveness and discord in the church, God began growing in my heart a desire for a term I've later come to know as city gospel movements. They're essentially a movement to unite the church in order to transform the city, to bring shalom, as in Jeremiah 29, but seek the welfare or shalom of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. And while God was growing this in my heart, I unintentionally, or at least unintentionally to me, began to meet people and come across organizations doing this sort of work all over the country and even the globe. I had no idea this was even a thing, but it became clear that God was building me up for this work through my time at SIR and connecting me to other people with shared vision and calling. I've now found myself at a global table with leaders from all over the world. Again, feeling completely ill-equipped, a total imposter, both professionally, but now also spiritually. But God is opening my eyes, and I'm starting to see that I have an incredibly unique experience and perspective to bring to the table. I'm able to bring the strategic processes that I've learned at SIR into these conversations, helping to think strategically about how the church can better partner together for the renewal of all things. And because of my work, I'm able to be a bridge builder linking business, government, nonprofits, and ministries together. And God has only peeled back layers, and he's still in the slow game play with me. But as years pass, I see another layer pulled back and a story taking shape. He's placed me in this work. He's honing my skills, allowing me to see a need the church should meet, and preparing me to step in and help lead, guide, and shape the work, all while still at SIR. And I'm excited, I'm humbled, and still constantly have to fight off the anxiety and imposter syndrome. But then I pause yet again and again and again and again and remind myself of God's truth, that we are made in his image, our skills are gifts from God, and we are his stewards, partnering in the work of reconciliation, restoration, and redemption. And how incredibly exciting is that? As we rest in the love of God, we're released to aspire to use our gifts in gratitude, caught up in God's mission for the sake of the world. It is not us, but God in and through us. And what God has called us towards is faithfulness in the midst of his faithfulness, to work hard and not squander the opportunities in front of us. And when we feel ill-equipped or uncertain, we can rest in the knowledge that God has not left us. He's there. He's given us the skills that we need. And so we can step boldly forward. At work, when we see connections made, opportunities presenting themselves, my boss calls it the cosmic highway. And while I often laugh entertained when he says this, it reminds me of a song by one of my favorite songwriters, Sandra McCracken, called God's Highway. So while the cosmic highway might seem like a fun one, I have to choose each and every day to stand instead on God's highway. And so in closing for encouragement, I'm just going to share the two stanzas. I'm going to speak them because I'm not as talented as my sisters Jasmine and Sheila. But she says, "My feet are strong, my eyes are clear. I cannot see the way from here. But on we go, he knows the way, and in his arms he keeps me safe. Fear not, keep on, watch and pray. Walk in the light of God's highway." Thank you.